Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that can speak to a set of diverse topics. What we want to do is maybe help you realize something that could be a good addition or a good fit for your business, but also if you know that you're struggling in some areas, give you some experts that you can turn to to help you with that, try to build some trust. But today is no different. We've been waiting for a couple weeks, excited to have Dr. Ian Brooks. He is the chief executive and founder of Rhodes Smith Consulting. They're leading transformation of people and organizations over 24 years. Ian has extensive experience in executive and leadership development, change management, business performance consulting, and communication planning. Also, he is the author of an upcoming book, Intention, Building Capabilities to Transform Your Story. And Ian, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Roy, and happy to be here. Heck, you said a lot of great things about me, and we can live up to it today.
Yeah, no, we get, that's what when I'm a guest on a show, I'm like, yeah, I'm quitting right now while I'm ahead. It can only
That's
go downhill
right.
from here. Well, no, I appreciate you. And like I said, I've been excited to have you on because I think there's so much to unpack. And I think we've talked about three or
Yeah,
four different things. I think if you don't mind, kind of start off with, how did you end up here? What got you into the business side? And then, just kind of how you got to this point.
sure, Roy, and yeah, it's been a long, windy road that it's continuous, to say the least. I arrived here, doing leadership development and change management for people over these last 24, 25 years. I started off as a psychologist.
Yeah.
So as a 13-year-old, I decided that I was always curious about why people did what they did and why people thought the way they did. I was someone of whom always wanted just to be average. I didn't want to be too high, nor did I want to be too low, because both of those offered judgment in a way that I didn't want or had to sustain. So for me, it was about understanding why people did what they did. And that required me being able to listen actively, as well as understanding who they are, meeting them where they wanted to go and where they wanted to be, as well as allowed me to be in the background. So I wasn't being judged or out front. So I started this journey as being getting into psychology. And I first, when I got my master's in clinical psychology, had an opportunity to work in a 24-hour lockdown ward with
Oh,
adults. So imagine individuals coming straight off the street who have chemical imbalances, um, and they need to be recycled back on their medications, and they need therapy, both individual and group therapy, which I was able to conduct. And I tell you, it afforded me a chance to really see a lens of people,
yeah.
of the development and what they go through. And in that particular setting, from a chemical imbalance standpoint, whereby we're really restricting them in a lockdown ward, and where they could not go anywhere without any supervision, or even leave without a key, which only staff had. And then going from that environment and putting them into back to the day-to-day worlds that they were coming from, and seeing some of those differences, and really offered and ushered in a new perspective of how people interact and who we are as individuals. And so I remember driving home one day and thinking about a response that one of my clients had. And it was this consistent response of, whenever I asked him, how was he doing? He would always come back and say, doing the best we can.
Right.
And when he said that, one, he said we, as he had many people who he was answering for. But it got me thinking that, we're all trying to do the best we can.
Right.
But that can is different from where we all start and our reference points. And so from that time, I decided, hey, I wanted to work with higher functioning people. So I went and made the transition to work with organizations. So that afforded me a chance to get my doctorate in psychology, more specifically in industrial organization psychology, where I could focus on transition management, change management, and coaching within organizations and people just one-on-one, even outside of organizations.
Yeah.
And it's afforded me a chance to work with some amazing companies and with some amazing people. And what I've come to realize along this journey is, um, I don't know if we're any different than the people in the ward. We can just cope better with
Right.
what we
Exactly.
have, and things have just kind of worked out for us. But we all, that narrative of we all just want to be better is true for us all. And I've yet to meet anyone who isn't and does not want to do that. And so that's afforded me a chance to work again with a number of different people from across some great organizations,
Yeah.
as well as author in a book that you mentioned, Intention, Building Capabilities to Transform Your Story, which just captures some of the guiding principles that I've picked up along the way of where I see people struggling the most from a development standpoint,
Yeah.
be them executives as well as just individuals in a day-to-day perspective, as we try to, again, master our own intentions and be better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey. I mean, I guess that says a lot about you with your patience and your empathy to be able to work, with that group in the lockdown. It's tough. And believe me, I say a prayer every day because I think we're all one paycheck or one, incident, emotional incident or tragedy in our life from being in that position. And so
Yes.
taking that time to, really understand that is, yeah, God bless you for doing that work. I know it's hard to attract people. Everybody wants to be, with the glitz and the glamour, and that's where the real work is done in the trenches. So I would just say,
Absolutely. It's I tell you, it was an extremely rewarding experience. One that I will always treasure.
right,
But as you mentioned, people come from a lot of different backgrounds to get to that place, and a lot of different reasons that have sparked them. Having worked with adults in that setting as well as with children as well in a very similar setting.
right,
Um, I'm truly thankful for the life that I can lead, and family, friends, colleagues, and being able to do some things that we are afforded to do. But you never know, just the slightest of instances that can actually influence people in such profound ways that it carries throughout the fabric of their entire life.
right.
It's extremely powerful. It's extremely scary,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things where I do think about it a number of times a month or so, just be thankful, because
Yeah.
it is selfless work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think, most of us could fill up our gratitude journals with, just being where we are. And a lot of times we
Yeah.
get frustrated in life, but we don't think about no matter how bad your day is going, there's somebody that's having a much worse day. And if we got shelter, food, and a
Yes.
place to go every day, we've pretty much, and good people in our life, our families, our loved
Mhm.
ones. We got all
Yes.
that. We have a lot to be thankful for.
Absolutely. And it gives me my perspective on change and working with people, because
Right.
as you said, it can always be worse.
Yeah.
So all we're trying to do is just be better.
Yeah. Exactly.
But this is no, we're not curing cancer. We're not doing anything else. We're just trying to take steps forward. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a pretty good transition because, one thing we talked about is leadership and,
Mhm.
kind of the development model versus maybe the bringing somebody in from the outside. But before we launch into that, I think, kind of what this does also to it, you said something, about trying to find where everybody's at, start from where they're
Mhm.
at. And I think we need to think a lot about that in the workplace as well. Sometimes we don't. We think of this as a homogeneous group that everybody's
Mhm.
on the same level, everybody thinks the same, processes the same. I tell you a simple thing that really changed my mind about this many years ago was I went to one of these painting parties,
Okay.
and the lady stands at the front, says pick up brush two and do green or whatever. And
Mhm.
I think what it taught me is that she said the same thing to all 25 of us,
Mhm.
but we all had very different pictures. And so
Right.
it just made me think about, wow, in the workplace, I can tell you one thing and I could tell your neighbor the same exact thing, same exact way. Y'all could both be listening to me at the same time. You could walk away with two totally different thoughts on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's it's a great example of just how we interpret what we hear, and how we process, but also it aligns to our own skill and abilities
Yes.
of what we're actually able to apply,
Yeah.
both in sight and sound, and then action.
Yeah.
And when I step into an organization, I remind myself that I can't judge the book based off on the chapter I've just walked in on.
Right.
So I'm going to see a whole lot. I'm going to hear a lot, but there's so much other context around who each of my clients are, the organization, the fabric, their own nuances of which in certain ways I'm not going to know on that first day. I'm not going to know on that in those first few weeks.
Yeah.
I will know over time based off of consistency of behavior, consistency of thought, of action, because everyone in my mind, in some ways, you're going to lie to me, right? You're going to lie in a context of just outright lie because you don't want to necessarily acknowledge the truth. You're either going to lie either in the context of you're going to withhold information because you don't think it's relevant, or you're going to lie because you just don't know the information yourself. So it's not like you're omitting something, you just don't know it yourself.
Right. Right.
And so for me, when I'm walking in and working with leaders and executives, I then have to start with what am I hearing and not judging the book on what I'm seeing on this chapter, but now understanding the fabric of who I'm actually working with.
Oh.
And I think it's a great segue because I even talk about in my book, Intention. One of the key points in this book at the very beginning is the principle of you, which really underscores who we are as people, because we all have characters that we have in our own lives,
Right.
right? That of who we are and how we show up. And our characters aren't job titles like VP of this or director of that, or it's not even a title of dad, sibling, brother, uncle. You know, it's not a title defined by that as much as it's a title of Mr. Know-it-all. So in certain situations, when someone's challenged, how do they show up?
Right.
Or the abominable snowman from the old Bugs Bunny cartoon, right? With abominable snowman, we just wanted nothing more than a buddy, and here are Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny get lost, and the abominable snowman just found a pet, and now he's just choking the heck out of Bugs Bunny,
Right.
all because he just wanted to love him. He
Right.
wanted a pet, but clearly Daffy and Bugs Bunny didn't see it that way at all. But imagine how that transfers over to one's job and to one's family life, where they want something so much and so bad, they just strangle the life out of it, where all they have to do is just let go a little bit and they would get exactly what they want.
Right.
Um, and so, in that context, and as you described, as I work with my leaders, I try to find who their characters are, not what they're showing me, but through my interviews with their peers or their direct reports, what my conversations are with them on a regular basis to really understand who are your characters and how are you showing up. Because as you described from that painting, each of us has our own characters on how our skills and abilities transfer over
Right.
into what we hear and do. And it's my responsibility, both for my clients, but even for myself, to see how am I showing up in a way that's authentic, but also acknowledges all the things and characters I've created in my life that have kept me safe and kept me in this proverbial box that have made me successful, or at least halfway successful, um, to move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing too, I think as you were talking it, I was even thinking like likes and dislikes, because if you're a spreadsheet person
Mm-hmm.
that set next to maybe somebody that really likes to read in the written word, somebody tells me, okay, we need these numbers crunched and this, I kind of get a little excited, like, oh yeah, because that's what I like to do. I like
Right.
spreadsheets and numbers. Now, the person that's more of the reader, the wordsmith, they're like,
Mhm.
hey, I see three numbers together and, I go blind for a short intermittent time, and
Right.
so it's like, I think that also has a lot to do is, not to jump the gun, but, trying to match the right person with the right project, with the right job, and not intimidating, like you've
Mhm.
got to do this. Like, well, why can't we just find you something that fits you,
Mhm.
you can excel, and then we'll find, just suit everybody to the right project, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point to acknowledge, where are people's skill sets and where can they all thrive.
Right.
Because I have yet to also meet, just as I mentioned, someone who doesn't want to be better. I have yet to meet anyone who wants to waste their time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And in that, people want to excel in what they're good at and what they enjoy doing. So that person who enjoys Excel crunching and looking at the numbers, et cetera, that's a different skill set as well as a potential different project or role on a project than say someone else who has a different way of thinking,
Right.
who likes the talking piece behind that. And all good leaders, can acknowledge what their team's strengths and weaknesses are. Now that doesn't mean we keep everyone in their strengths and dismiss their weaknesses, as much as it is acknowledging what they're strong at and where we need to either coach them up from a leadership standpoint or acknowledge that we're just going to extend them a little bit beyond their comfort zone so that they can be contribute in different ways. So it creates a little bit more of a challenge, but also doing so we don't impact their confidence.
Yeah.
And we don't impact their ability to actually get their job done.
Yeah.
Because at that point you hit people who are then frustrated or can't deliver all around expectations that may or may not have been set for themselves, but
Right.
were set by somebody else. And it's all due to just not knowing who's on your team. And in that case, the effectiveness of that leader being able to transfer that information over and getting the most out of the talent.
Yeah, and I think, kind of, you mentioned this a little earlier but I think it's good for, especially when we come into a new situation, we have to realize there may be a small percentage. We're not going to say everybody, but let's say the vast majority of people, they just want to come in, they want to do a good job, they want to feel good. I have never met a person in my life, I don't think, that woke up in the morning and said, I'm going in to do a terrible job today.
Right.
Like
Right.
maybe some people went in and said, I'm going to do as little as possible today.
Yes.
And there are those people, but
Yes.
for the vast majority of people, they want to go in, they want to do a good job, they want to feel good when they leave. They don't want to put themselves in a position to feel bad because they didn't do something right.
Absolutely. And I think one of the challenges is, for some leaders, and as we look at people who may be, air quote, slacking or not bringing their true selves or they're coming in wrecking things when they come in there, for projects or work or otherwise, it's truly understanding what's their priority and what's their goal.
Right.
And does it align to mine? Does it align to ours as a particular team or mine as a leader?
Right.
Because everyone has a purpose, and sometimes someone's purpose is to do, as you mentioned, the least amount of work as possible. But they've executed against that purpose. Now, in that respect, they've done exactly what they said they wanted to do, and they can walk away thinking, yes, I did exactly what I wanted. But it also, on the other hand, that also has an impact to others. And now it causes conflict unnecessarily.
Right.
And so really, as I'm having led a team of 25 people at its max at one point, one of my chief responsibilities wasn't about the work. Heck, I knew my team could do the work. So it was less about that. And in fact, I was the newest person on the team. So that many of them had been in their roles 2 years at the least and longer when I took over the team, of which I had never led before. And one of the first things I had to do was understand who they were as people and what was their motivation. Why did they come to work? What was the reason they stayed in the role so long? What was their motivations? What is their priorities? And that's not only about the work itself that they were doing, but where did they see themselves in several years? Or what was their priorities outside of the work life and outside of the four walls in which I saw them, with their families, with their friends? What were their interests? What were the things that really captured their mind? And only then, when I understood the balance between what they did at work and what their families were and who they were as individuals outside the four walls of which they were being paid to actually execute something, only then could I actually truly lead them in a way that was truly authentic to who they were as individuals, but also bringing the team together in a way that they could partner in different ways and expand upon their own interests to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we kind of jump in the middle saying, and I know we talked briefly about this as well, sometimes we can come in and we see things, first week we won't change anything, but that third week we're changing everything.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, and there's something to be said for that. However, that can go sideways very quickly. And without truly acknowledging where your team is and where you're trying to go.
Yeah, they told me don't change it the first day. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm just counting down till I can change everything.
That's right. I've given enough grace period right now. You know what? Now it's time to change it because I'm frustrated by this stuff.
Yeah. And I think, the other part of this is, I would suspect is communication, which is
Yes.
something I feel like we're very short on a lot of times. But
Hmm.
it's like if we take that time to actually communicate and find out what something went subpar, if it went
Hmm.
wrong, if they're dragging, a lot of
Hmm.
times that may be a good employee that's got some big burden that they're carrying with them. And,
Yes.
I give you a good example. A friend of mine used to work in the senior living industry, and she had a
Hmm.
really good caregiver and just no call, no show,
Hmm.
which is what most of the employees do. They just find another job and they just
Hmm.
leave, and that's that. But this person was different.
Hmm.
And the staff said, don't worry about it. It's just normal. No call, no
Hmm.
show. And this executive director said, no, she actually went out to this lady's house to talk to her, say, what's up? And,
Hmm.
found out that unfortunately, husband had gotten a DWI the night before. So they impounded the car. She had no way to work, no one to keep the kids. And so
Hmm.
she's like, why is it easier just to not come in, not call? I'll go find another job.
Hmm.
But the executive director is like, she was such a good person and such a good worker, they could not let her go. And so
Hmm.
what they ended up doing was helping her get some childcare, rearranged her schedule for a couple days to let her come in from 3 to 11 or whatever.
Hmm.
But there was a solution to the issue. Now, and
Right.
we have to understand, not always going to be that simple.
Sure.
Sometimes there are no solutions except for, just to agree to disagree and part ways. But
Right.
I just feel like it's a lot of times it's worth that conversation to find out what's going on in their life.
Yes. You're absolutely right. Um, and to that very acknowledgement, that very story, is one, actually taking the time to have the conversation, one, to actually seek to understand.
Yeah.
And that requires active listening, where you're not listening for an end result. You're just listening to what's being produced and
Right.
what's being in the moment, versus also having a communication of knowing where you're trying to go. Like we're trying to solve this together.
Right. Right.
Oftentimes, I think we get in this cycle of communication where it's unidirectional,
Yes.
where we're just communicating what we think, or we get into arguments to win, not to solve.
Right.
Like, and you think about marriages that way, in any relationship where someone tries to have a position of power over someone based off of what they're communicating, based on the language that they're using, and even the tone, and even how their posture even
Right.
impacts that.
Right.
Um, that's a surefire way to make sure that, one, someone stays in power and put someone else down. But then, even in the example that you offered, that was a effort, both of driving to the woman's home, having a conversation, and
Right.
understanding, one, here's what our policies are here at the organization. That's not changing. But secondly, what's that policy in the context of the person of whom we're actually working with?
Right.
And having a compassion, but also, I'm sure, setting expectation as they move forward.
Yeah.
Um, I think oftentimes when I work with leaders, especially new leaders who are coming into organizations, they want to demonstrate their power, because that's how leadership is often defined. That I am here and you're there. I'm the one coming up with the strategy, and you will follow that strategy, because if you don't, then I don't survive. So
Right.
I need people who can do that. And as such, we find ourselves, as we've talked about, just starting to change stuff because we need to set a tone.
Right.
When that tone might be one that is earmarked for something back in, the 60s, 70s, 80s, um, and not something that will really work. It is necessary as
Right.
we move forward as being true leaders. And how do we get the most out of really good people?
Yeah.
And again, that is not always the case. Sometimes you have to make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization, the best interest of your team. And that best interest may be, we'll part ways today.
Right.
And that's fine too, because it isn't the right fit.
Right.
But when you can actually communicate expectations, acknowledgement, setting ground rules, and then allowing someone to meet it the best way that they can, and let's talk about whether you are or you are not in an open form,
Yeah.
an open way, people be one, feel a lot more respected, but secondly, they'll probably work a little bit harder and they'll try to meet those expectations.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to choice if they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And one more thing before we move on, I know want to talk about the, external versus internal
Yeah.
development, but, I see a lot of companies, and I agree. We can't change what we don't measure. And
Mhm.
I'm a numbers guy, so I love that. But
Yeah.
one thing I do talk a lot about is the metrics that we set.
Hmm.
We can't use those to turn around and beat people up with them.
Yes.
I was like, because I've worked for a company like that once that we had these, but then it turned around to be a stick. And so what happened was people figured out a way to work around these metrics where we didn't really know what the heck was going on. And
Hmm.
it messed the whole thing up, because now we weren't solving for what we were trying to measure for. We couldn't do any predicting, and the employees may be getting away with stuff because they weren't reporting correctly. But
Right.
anyway, and because what you had said about this communication is that, we can't, I don't like to always be my is right. And I think at some
Mhm.
point, we do have to make hard decisions. I'm not saying that they never come up, but instead of always looking around to try to punish somebody to fix things, if we would again seek to understand what is the
Mhm.
problem here, and get people to be able to feel like they can actually open up with you.
Yeah.
To me, it's much easier to solve these problems, because I've worked with companies that where I can go in as a third party and do this mediation and say, let's talk about this process, what's going on. And they feel safe because I'm not trying to hammer them or threatening their job. I just tell
Right.
them, I'm Switzerland. I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to the bottom of this problem where we can
Right.
document it and get it fixed. Whereas
Right.
other people are like, hey, the first negative word, the first thing you say you did wrong and coming out, well, you're going to be fired anyway. So try to hide
Right.
it as long as you can. So anyway, I just feel like we have to walk this balancing act.
Yeah. And we do have to walk a balancing act. But I know from a leadership standpoint, it takes a lot more patience than some of us are willing to actually offer it.
Correct.
To actually communicate, to actually listen, to actually partner to solve versus solving it ourselves and making unilateral decisions.
Yeah.
Um, that takes a lot more effort than just making a decision and go,
Yeah.
because we don't have necessarily time for that. Let's sit down and drive to someone's home and have a conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of executives in that or leaders in that place would, hey, what's our policy? How many times has this person done this? Got it. That's all the data we need. And let's move
Right.
on with our lives.
Right.
It takes a lot more work to actually do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we all, I think, tend to struggle with development and leadership and even just change in general, and why I even wrote a book about it.
Right.
Because it does take a lot of work, and work we may not necessarily see. And as you mentioned, it's not something you can always measure, because people will work around, find loopholes in those measures.
Right. Right.
And we always do.
Yeah. 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 And I look at it too from the, I do a lot of employee retention work. And so I look
Mhm.
at it from that retention perspective
Mhm.
is, sometimes when we take the extra time, we can uh, we build some goodwill with our people where we
Mhm.
can keep them and solve some problems, keep our people in place versus not, because sometimes that unilateral decision, what I've seen is, the first domino that drops, then we start having three or four more that say, I'm not dealing with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and be out of here. Now we've got other issues. So
Mhm.
anyway, not that it doesn't need to be done. I'm not saying that. I know like there are times where we have to make those quick decisions, like
Yes.
it's done, over and out, and move forward. But talking about developing leadership, that's important because, we were kind of joking before we came on here that, sometimes it's better to develop prior sometimes it's better develop internally versus bring
Mhm.
somebody externally. And I'll let you explain those differences. But then if we want to develop internally, it's a process and it's a long run game. It's not, like I said, is we can't say, Joe's retiring in 2 weeks. We got to develop somebody to take his place. It's a much longer time horizon.
Absolutely. Any leadership development does take a lot of time and effort. And as we were talking, and even as your question points out, at times it's appropriate to go outside of the organization to hire certain level of talent.
Yeah.
In those instances, I've found it successful or helpful to bring someone from the outside in when one, they have a particular skill set we're trying to integrate into our organization, be it on a particular product or a particular leadership mindset as we're looking to change the culture.
Yeah.
In those instances, it can be extremely beneficial to actually bring someone in. Even in the example of what you offered around, hey, we have Joe retiring in 2 weeks. We need someone in here. Well, guess what? We probably need to hire someone because if we haven't developed that skill, or if we haven't identified that successor up to this point, then quite frankly, we don't have it.
Right.
And thus we're going to be scrambling anyway.
Yeah.
So who have we groomed in that respect to actually take Joe's place? As I'm sure his retirement, while it may be a shock, probably was anticipated in some way.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I think those are some of the key benefits of bringing someone in. Again, when you're looking to change the culture, and it can infuse some key skills and behaviors and expectations into the organization. It really does prove beneficial, as well as if there's some of the last minute changes, and obviously we haven't maybe not done a good enough job from a succession planning standpoint. But as we talked about, establishing an internal succession and talent pipeline is extremely important. As you talked about earlier, it leads into employee retention because employees want to know that there's growth opportunities here.
Right.
It doesn't mean that that growth is defined by more money, a different title. That growth could also mean I get a new job, as in I get to do different work and I'm challenged. And that doesn't mean it's for everybody. It does mean that you have an opportunity, if you want, to move in this organization in a way that you can grow in different ways. Having worked in that talent development field, specifically, for leadership development and even creating talent pipelines, I've realized that creating talent pipelines, as you mentioned, is a marathon.
Yeah.
It's something that you continuously plan for and identify, in the respect that if we're looking for a new role, that should have been identified, unless it's a startup. Obviously there's instances where you can't, but if we're looking to have successors for some key jobs, then we need to make sure we're identifying those individuals, with a 2-year runway.
Right.
One, that they can build the knowledge, skills, and abilities across different industry or different experiences, as well as having the right level of visibility within the organization, because the successor to a role is not the one doing the hiring. It's the person's boss who's doing the hiring. So they need to have trust that this individual of whom we'll be replacing, me or you, can actually do the job.
Right.
And that they have trust in that. So what are those experiences that need to be created, as well as what's the line of sight and visibility towards, my peers, or to my boss, that they have some level of visibility and that they can build some trust. I have found that, as I think about this last year, as I've been working with organizations around their talent pipelines, they really don't have them. They're not very strong, they're very weak. Some of the top talent are leaving because it's a lot easier for people now to work from home and work remotely. And I think that's going to be a continuous narrative as we start to open back up nationwide, and as we are open now nationwide in a lot of respects. We're going to be losing top talent. And those organizations that have done a strong enough job understanding that, having succession planning for critical roles, and they've started that prior to, from a development standpoint, prior to someone leaving and prior to the poop moments where Joe is leaving in 2 weeks, those are the ones that are going to be able to survive, not only as a consistency of the fabric of the organization,
Yeah.
not only the consistency of projects, um, the consistency of the culture, but you also know who you're being able to sustain momentum, and it's tied to a strategic vision of where the company is going. And those companies that have done that very well or are doing that very well will find themselves consistently more successful than those companies that do not and look to holistically or singularly hire someone from the outside to
Yeah.
bring them in, because you then will have constant churn, which is not what we're looking for.
Right. Yeah. And it's, a lot of times you get some resistance for the cost of the
Mhm.
development plans. And, I think it's definitely something that needs to be monitored, because if
Yeah.
everybody works their way through the system, but they don't finish it or get through it, or they don't get the job, then, at some point it may just be uh, uh, a waste of time and a waste of money. But
Mhm.
I think the one thing to look at too, though, is that, it's the old joke that the CFO comes to the CEO and says, "Hey, how can we continue to train all these people and have them leave?" And the CEO's like, "How can we not train them and have them stay here?" So,
Yeah.
again, we kind of have to look at both sides of this, that, there's going to be some leakage. We just probably can't capture everybody that would work through our programs. But if we could
Mhm.
capture most of them, I assume we would still be beneficial to, and again, when I say internal, I don't necessarily mean we have to have our people doing the training. It could be a
Right.
combination of our people, contractors,
Ex-
programs, however that looks. But I'm just talking about, the company spending the money on that pipeline.
Absolutely. And I think that to that analogy you just made, that's absolutely the case. The CEO is right. How can we not,
Right.
train these individuals? But also, as we think about it as well, the higher we go up in the organization, there are less roles
Right.
available. And so in that context, you will always have some leakage because there aren't going to be roles for everyone.
Right.
The higher we get, the more seats that drop out of this game of musical chairs that we call leadership and executive level jobs. And so in that context, we have to be prepared for that, because we don't know who's going to stay and who's going to go, both from those we've invested in from a talent perspective,
Right.
as well as those who may just leave, who are not investing in right now, who are individuals sitting in critical roles. Um, and one of the things that, in one of my previous organizations, they did a really good, solid job of, and I was able to help lead from a development standpoint, were job rotations across different parts of the organization.
Yeah.
And we focused on capabilities, a la behaviors of communications, strategic thinking, their ability to influence, their ability to partner and to communicate. Um, and we had this list of top talent that we just rotated across open roles and on different projects across different pillars within the organization. And it afforded the organization to, one, have diversity of thought within those particular roles, as well as our top talent being able to be viewed as top talent and have that feeling of like, wow, they really want to invest in me to do something for 6 months.
Right.
And we're swapping talent out with each other so that, again, we could share in the benefits of what one's skill sets are. Again, specifically on their capabilities, and more specifically in that, their how behaviors, those how activities, so our behaviors. We can always teach somebody how to make something or do something. We can teach them a process, right? We can't always teach them, especially from a leadership standpoint, we can't always teach them the behaviors on how to be a good leader.
Right.
That takes a lot longer time, a lot more reinforcement, a lot more visibility than we're typically afforded. Because as we just talked about earlier, our metrics are tied to what we do,
Right.
not necessarily how we do it. And so it's a little bit more challenging in that respect. But I will say that, that leakage of top talent should be something that we see as a right of doing the right thing for our employees in our organization, knowing that someone's leaving not because they weren't developed, but because we just ran out of seats
Right. Yeah.
and ran out of projects. And hey, we can say, you know what, we still did the right thing,
Right.
and we're doing the right thing by this organization. And when we think about as you mentioned, a retention perspective. People want to know, one, clarity of their, where's the organization? What are their values? Do I trust my leadership? And do I have an opportunity to grow? And one of the things that we can do and that I stress with our leadership teams is that growth perspective and being cognizant of that
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and it's hard when we
Yeah.
lose those guys, that we've developed and we hope may be our next leader to fill that position. But, I think we have to take the attitude of, like you said, we did the right thing for this person. And that's really, again, we're cultivating relationships because you never know when this guy may come back around again. He
Absolutely.
may go for a minute, but again, if we part on bad ways and we're destructive, that's not good for our image, and it's not good for those people that we may be able to attract back in some time.
Yeah, absolutely. To bring them back in. And that would be, obviously those repatriates, if you will, to bring them back into the organization because they can take what they learned with us, do it someplace else, get refinement, and then opportunities to come back. I think the other part to reinforce as well is we think about it from leadership development standpoint or just development in general, and that it's only that a level of training and visibility, but it touches on job movement that we sometimes lose sight of. Because again, as the higher we get up in the organization, those individuals tend to stay in their roles a lot longer.
Right.
And absent a organizational change, of leadership change, of either bringing someone in or politics playing itself out at those higher levels of the organization, those roles typically don't open up all that often.
Yeah.
So you're more likely to see people leave as they get higher and higher, because the chairs just aren't there. And acknowledging at what point do we force change in certain ways, even though from a development standpoint, um, we may not have invested in that person from a skill set standpoint. Maybe they just developed in a one particular pillar, and now we need to move them into another area.
Right.
And so, just really having that transparency around and visibility for all of those across the organization so that they know that there is an opportunity to develop either in a singular track, let's say it's marketing or HR or in a production group, or across many pillars,
Right.
because there's different tracks that one can take in that development. But having that visibility to say, hey, it is possible. And just because we go to a new role and we may not be successful doesn't make us any less talented. It
Yeah.
just means that it shows us where we have some more growth to do.
Yeah.
That's also the acknowledgement as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in addition to the self growth and, learning the different skills for that person, maybe the other thing they do is learn a bit more about what these other departments do, because, I've seen that in big companies where it's a one track guy. He was always in operations, excuse me, and gets to the top, but he doesn't understand, what is accounting and finance and
Mm-hmm.
quality assurance. There's this whole other part of a company that they have really no clue about. So,
Absolutely. And that's how you build that growth through that end to end view of, okay, what are you impacted by from finance to
right,
marketing to HR? Um, and you don't need to be an expert in it, just to the extent that you understand the process and what are the upstream and downstream impacts.
right,
Um, because when we bring you back to our group here in the processing and production area or operations, you understand now holistically how the process works and also how to better lead
yeah,
as a result.
yeah,
Um, and I think we sometimes lose sight of that. Actually, it was funny with my team when I originally took them over, that 25. I actually broke them into groups. It was a training team for just acknowledgement, and so they'd often come to me and they'd be complaining like, "Oh, this group does this," or "Oh, that group does that," right? Or "Oh, the call centers want this," or "Our instructional designers or can't do this." So it was always somebody else's fault.
right,
I said, that was fair, right? It's far be it for me to tell you that these aren't true experiences. Um, but what I asked them to do was, okay, because I was just one day I was like, okay, this is going to be part of your development plans for all 25. I said, I'm going to break you. First off, I want you to just list out your top 5 things that you think we have problems with. just individually, just give them to me. And then once I got them, and if you don't have 5, that's fine. Just give me no more than 5. No more than 5. Because they'll give me everything
Yeah,
under the
because
sun. I didn't want that.
guy that turns in 10 pages worth.
Exactly. 5 was already too much for 25 people. Believe me, that was already more than I should have asked for. But I was giving them some rope, and I knew that there's be some overlap. So I said, okay, here's the list, and removed any duplicates. And I said, okay, now that we have the list from each of you individually, now I want you to go in, and you could only select the 5 that you think have the most impact. If we were to try to solve 5 of these, which would those 5 be? And you could only select 5. Now that you see everyone's thoughts. And we got down to those 5 based off of just pure ranking of how many dots were next to them.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, now we have our 5. I'm breaking you into 5 different groups, right? And you're going to select, you're going to randomly select one of these 5 projects to work on. And as part of this project is part of your development plan of understanding what is the root cause of this problem. I want you to set up interviews with the processes and the people impacting these processes upstream, our team, and even downstream, and understand where they think the challenges are related to this project and this problem that you see. We're not placing blame. It's you versus me. It's seeking to understand. And the third thing is, okay, once we understand that, I want you to come back to me and then acknowledge, and let's talk about what is the true problem? Is it difference in strategy from one group to another? Is it because of resourcing? What's the reason that you now have uncovered? And that is what we're going to solve once you get down to that theme or those themes. And it was a good exercise for my team to, one, develop and understand that, hey, we can all complain. Welcome to all worlds, all groups. Someone else is doing something wrong and it's someone else's fault. So check, we got that. Now I'm asking you to solve it. Now I'm asking you to really think through organizationally. What are some of the decisions that were made? Why were those decisions made? How can we solve it? Because we're not going to ask them to solve it. This is our problem. Or if we need them, how are we partnering with them for a solution? And that's how we're going to move forward. And I tell you, it was a good growth opportunity for each of them to really acknowledge, as we're describing from a development standpoint, that holistic perspective that we can get so entrenched in what we do every day, we lose, and we only see the negative sides of what others are doing to us or against us.
Yeah.
We lose sight of that. True, we work for one organization. We're all trying to be efficient. Now that efficiency might be defined differently, and it often is, but we're all trying to be efficient and successful.
Right.
So how can we all work together?
Yeah.
Because no one wants to rework. And that was a good learning opportunity for them to think about it from business, but also change management as well.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's very simple. When you start asking questions, the issue arises, and it's something so simple as there was a miscommunication. One thing I'm thinking about was a process that it was totally messed up. But as we started asking questions, it was like, oh, there was a miscommunication about a year ago. Half the people got the letter. It was a miscommunication. The other half didn't. So we got people still working off this, bogus plan that somebody had thrown out. Sometimes, again, it gets back to the communication aspect is once everybody had the current and the best available information, problem solved. I mean, it just went away.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just bringing the awareness, as you mentioned, and you don't need to do anything. It's like, oh, got it. We don't need to do anything.
Exactly.
Merely having the conversation was all we needed. Other times it is like, okay, we need to work this out. To see how we can help each other out.
Yeah, and I think for me, the takeaway from this conversation is going to be the seek to understand. I think that's the biggest thing we can do in a lot of life, not just at work, but in life as well. When like we were talking about our partner, I usually do what I'm told, so I stay out of trouble. But but when she's off of her game, it's I like And I know that's not who you are. So, what's going on? Was it, something
Right.
with the kids? Did, the dog bite you on the foot or, whatever. But I know there's something amiss. And I think it's just a good thing because if then we can have empathy for, if they were lashing out at me, it wasn't because I did anything and I don't have to feel bad and I don't have to get mad. It was
Right.
just a thing. And now we've worked through it and it's over. It's not a thing anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's about creating that transparency, and even as we described it earlier as well, it's we're in the conversations to solve this together.
Right.
It's only when we're in the conversations to win, and the solve is my answer, not yours.
Yeah.
That's when we find ourselves in a lot more trouble
Yeah.
and in a lot more contentious environments than probably we should be.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's always going to work out. It does not mean it's always pleasant.
Right.
It does
Right.
mean it does take a little bit more time.
Yeah.
It does mean sometimes checking our emotions at the door
Yeah.
and really coming in from a place that we're all trying to solve this together versus me versus you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
find ourselves, and I know when I find myself in the me versus you situation, it's going to be you, because I'm not going to fight. You
Right.
can have it.
Right. Right.
It's not worth it to me, and I'm happy to go
Yeah. Yeah.
for my
Yeah.
own sanity.
Yeah. Yeah. We think about those things and then because you kind of have to think about at the end, what did I really win?
Yeah,
If our organization is in disarray and, we didn't work together to figure out that problem, again, it's like sometimes it's hard to check your ego and say,
yeah,
maybe I'm not wrong, but I don't always have to try to prove how right that I am. I mean, there's, we can find that common ground where somebody else can have the a thought that works, and we kind of go with that instead of standing on our. It's difficult. I mean, we just have
oh
to.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I would say without question, it is a challenge, especially when pride gets the better of us sometimes. And as we climb the corporate ladder and become more successful, it's defined based on pride and
yeah,
our results and what we've done and what we've been able to achieve.
yeah,
So to take a back seat or acquiesce can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge,
yeah,
to say the least. But what is our strength is also our weakness, but it can be refined,
yeah,
and I think that's the benefit.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Ian. Well, we've run way over. I sorry about that, but it's such a good conversation. That
Yeah.
really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. Before we go, first off, um, what is a tool or a habit, something that you use every day, either professionally or personally, that just adds a lot of value?
Sure. The first thing that I do every single day is I work out. For me, it's a habit, and it's just not merely of working out just for the sake of working out. It affords me an opportunity to, one, invest in myself in the day. As a leadership development coach and speaker and author, I'm often giving my time to others. That's what I enjoy. That's what it makes me a whole. It makes me excited. That's what I'm passionate about. But I also recognize I need some investment in myself. And so for me, the habit that I do each morning is going to the gym and just reinvesting in my own health, because it also allows me to reinvest in my thinking and just resettling and calming myself down, taking a stock in my day and what am I prioritizing and how am I prioritizing my actions, and anything that does not fit that priority, I also give myself the opportunity to think through, is that, should I be doing it or not?
Yeah.
So the gym in and of itself is an investment in myself, both from a health standpoint, physically, but also mentally, in taking stock in my priorities. And that may look like something different for each of us, but I do say the habit should be always invest in yourself
Yeah.
from a health standpoint. And then secondly, always re-anchor back on what is your priority. And for me, I do that at the gym.
I love that, invest in yourself, because I don't think we do enough of that. We tend to want to give ourselves away in business and in life. So great advice. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Um, so tell everybody, who do you like to work with? How can you help them? And of course, how can they reach out and get a hold of you?
Sure. I like working with people who are passionate about taking the next step. Many people of whom I work with in the organizations, you're already successful. right? You're good enough as is. I'm trying to take you out of the box you're in and take you to that next step. And so, because of that, you have a certain level of passion, dedication, and commitment into yourself to get there. Not only that, you're going to do it the right way. And so, those are the individuals I work with, both organizationally as well as individuals I work with one on one. In that respect, I do work with a number of different organizations, both individually as well as doing large leadership development workshops, again, as well as working with people outside of organizations. So I can be found on my website, and that is at rhodessmith.com. That's RHODESSMITH.com. I can also be found on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. B_intention, where you can find more information about myself, more information about some of my book material, as well as some of the things I do day to day. As well, you can find my book on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble under Intention, Building Capabilities to Transform Your Story.
Okay. Awesome. Y'all reach out, let Dr. Ian help you. I know he can help take you to the next level for sure. All right. Thanks a lot. That's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. We appreciate all of our listeners for sure. You can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. I'd be glad to get it added. We're also on all the major social media networks. We typically probably hang out there on Instagram a little bit more. I'm pretty simple, so the pictures are worth 1,000 words for me, that's for sure. But anyway, y'all reach out. We love to hear from everybody. If you have a show ideas or guest ideas, let me know. Also, a video of this interview will go up on YouTube when the episode goes live, so you can check us out over there as well. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.